Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. I am delighted to extend a warm welcome to Professor Christine Rivers, who joins us on our podcast today. Professor Christine Rivers is a professor of business education and mindfulness at Surrey Business School, University of Surrey, specializing in people and organizations. Her research dwells into the intersection of mindfulness and contemplative practices with business education, personal and professional development, and the impact of technology on working life and well-being. Alongside her academic expertise, Professor Christine is also a qualified health and lifestyle coach, as well as a yoga, meditation, and breathwork teacher. Professor Christine has played a key role in shaping business and management education, serving in various leadership positions at Surrey, including Head of the Department, Director of Studies, and Director of Education. She has also contributed outside Surrey as Associate Editor for the Journal of Management Education and as a reviewer for several prominent organizations. Professor Rivers is currently serving as the Teaching and Learning Conference Academy of Management Chair and Executive Member for the Management Education and Development Division at Academy of Management with a focus on 2024 program. She has received recognition and awards from the British Academy of Management, Management Organizational Behavior Teaching Society, and holds a National Teaching Fellowship with Advanced HE UK. She frequently publishes her work in journals, contributes to Times Higher Education, and delivers keynotes and podcast talks. Professor Christine earned her PhD in Social and Organizational Anthropology from the University of Surrey and her MPhil and BSc in Anthropology, Theatre and Communication Studies from the University of Vienna. In this episode, Professor Christine Rivers shares profound insights from her transformative book, Mindfulness and Business Education, Developing Self-Aware Future Leaders, a Practical Guide. Professor Christine Rivers, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It always sounds so long, which makes me think I'm older than I think I am.
Professor Rivers, could you explain why mindfulness is becoming an essential component of business education and leadership development?
Yes, yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. Um, as you have pointed out, I've been working in this field for quite a while, and working with a lot of young minds and adults and graduates. But also, we at Surrey, we're known for our employability rate for our students. So we work with a lot of employers as well. And so, one of the things that I found really fascinating is that, particularly over the last 5 years, and with COVID, it was even stronger, but it happened before that as well, the mental health referrals of young people, and particularly those in business studies, but also engineering, we know those these days, has increased massively. And so the question was, I was thinking, why is this happening? Is it a suicidal issue, and so on? And then in addition to that, I was thinking, what can we therefore do in the business school to support those students? Because there is so many coming. And that sort of got me into this whole idea about how can I design curriculum, and we will talk about different areas of how this can be done so that it is integrated and that we can move a little bit from the sort of very cognitive based way of doing academia to a sort of more embodied way of doing academia, and hopefully, sowing a seed um, that people can build on and take into the working life, because in the end of the day, there are our future workforce and our future leaders.
How do you believe mindfulness contributes to the development of self-aware future leaders, particularly in a world characterized by volatility and uncertainty?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I was thinking about this today, this morning on the walk, and I think it's about learning how to become comfortable with those concepts such as volatility, ambiguity, uncertainty, and really understanding how it feels like and being okay with it is not something that you get taught in school or in any management book, not even in psychology. This is something that you need to do yourself. And it's becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, I often say. Yeah. And so that whatever happens outside in your environment, how do I respond to this? This is going to be the skill that they need to have in order to make good decisions, in order to, um, be healthy in their body and in their mind, and also to be able to model that to others. Because at some point, I hope that there are future leaders so that they are there as role models, which means that people will follow them.
In the first part of your book, you discuss the historical foundations of mindfulness. Can you
Mhm.
expand on how mindfulness has evolved within the context of business education?
Again, the answer to this morning was it hasn't. This is the first book in this region, in this area, in this sphere. There have been a number of studies, sort of, and I'm drawing on them as well, of course, because I was trying to bring them all together and really evaluate the state of the art. Um, but it is still a little bit perceived, suspicious, and not sure whether it fits, even though when people experience it and when they bring it in, they can see the benefits of it very, very quickly. So I would say we are in the very, very beginning, in the infancy of bringing this in. Schools also slowly try to do that, which is important because obviously they feed into universities later on. There is also quite a bit of work around mindfulness in corporates, and obviously with the whole employee well-being wave, this has received a little bit more attention, but it's really that part in the middle, it felt like it was a little bit forgotten. And I think, especially in a business school, when I speak to my students, there also seems to be sort of this notion of I have to present myself in a certain way. I have to be tough and I have to be strong. And I, I might have a burnout at some point, but no, not really. I'm a marketing executive, or I'm a financial executive or investment manager or whatever it is. And there is um, this sort of stigma coming with that you have to behave and be in a certain way. Yet, and this is the funny thing is, when you do speak to all the CEOs and the people who hold these high-powered leadership roles, and I have asked all my first year students to interview people this year for their assessment. They all emphasize the importance of self-care and particularly mindfulness techniques like meditation or mindfulness coaching, which I do as well, or yoga or something else. Mindfulness can be going for a swim and just enjoying that movement. It's about learning to be present. So that's what we need to bring in there because, again, I think a lot of business school students, like a lot of other people as well, we either live in the past or in the future. Yeah. And so, how can we harness the present moment, be okay with it, and move on from there?
Professor Christine, you address various leadership approaches currently taught in business schools. How does mindfulness challenge or complement these traditional approaches to leadership?
Yeah, so I think what is really interesting, if you look at the sort of evolution of leadership theories, and I'm not a leadership researcher, but obviously I had a look at it, I do teach it, so my knowledge is also limited. But what I was looking at particularly is which of those feature mindfulness aspects. And the majority of these leadership theories that we have and that we teach to our students are very mind-based. Okay, so the question is, how can we help them to become leaders if they only lead with the head and not with the heart? So that was one way to think about it. How can we bring this sort of more together? Because it is about the alignment of the body and the mind. But then, on the other hand, there are already leadership approaches, such as the contemplative leadership approach or embodied leadership, for instance, that take that into account. And there is some wonderful in the book. I go quite deep into principles that we can follow and that can help us. And I think what is important is as we're teaching leadership or even researching leadership or bringing it to our students or work with young leaders in corporates is to let them explore these different ones. And based on that, identify for themselves what sort of leader they actually are, right? So quite often you see on CVs, these are my leadership qualities. I'm systematic, I'm maybe, quite analytical, those sort of things, yeah. Um, but what about being contemplative? What about being embodied? What would that mean? How does somebody who adopts that in addition to other more mind-based leadership um, qualities, how would they lead? And that's what I think is something we need to consider and expand upon.
In the second section of your book, you explore ways to measure mindfulness. What are the most effective ways to assess mindfulness in business students, and why is this important?
The most effective way is experiential, of course. But if we do want to have a sort of more formal assessment, then I would say reflection can be a really useful tool to do that. I often invite my students to keep a journal and then submit that as part of a portfolio, so that they can see their journey. So the clue is in the word journal and journey, to really think about what has changed, because I think the whole point of, um, developing mindfulness skills around it, and reflection is part of this, is to see how does it impact my journey? How does it impact my life? What changes, what shifts can I experience within the body in terms of sensations that might change if you're suddenly dealing differently with a challenging situation? But also maybe the thoughts have changed, maybe my emotions towards a person has changed because I feel more compassionate about myself and I can extend that compassion to other people.
You emphasize the need for training business educators as mindfulness facilitators. What challenges do educators face when integrating mindfulness into their teaching, and how can they overcome these challenges?
Yeah, there are many challenges. Um, I think the most important thing is that whoever wants to take it on, in my opinion, needs to already have a regular established practice themselves, because it is an experiential experience, number one. But number two, how can you share something or teach something if you are not practicing it, if you are not bought into it? This isn't supposed to be an intellectual sharing of information. This is supposed to be a really experiential experience, of course. And I think that's what makes it very different for a lot of people, because the majority of people have maybe heard of it, but are not engaging it because academics are by nature more head-based. And so, it's very alien to them. That I think that's one thing. So there needs to be a shift from that perspective as well. Having said that, once I have worked with people, introduced it to them and in the classroom as well, they're mesmerized and they're often converted because they can see that suddenly the students are more engaged, calmer, more respectful, more compassionate, and just more considerate people. And it goes very quickly. It just takes 5 minutes. But I think, yeah, having that sort of regular practice and then going for additional training is definitely something. And there are a lot of different training facilities out there. I would always opt for one where there is an interactive, real-time synchronous interaction. So it doesn't have to be all face to face. It can be online, but I wouldn't do it as an asynchronous course, that where you're not interacting, because mindfulness feeds off the energy of other people. Yeah. And I think when we practice in a group, that's when we feel the real benefits. You can meditate alone, you can be mindful on your own, all these sorts of things. But I think we can really see the difference it makes on us, as a human race, if you want, by connecting with other people. And it's those connections that are really important because, in the end of the day, I think as educators, we want to have an impact of this generation, and I think we need to consider that. So yeah, there is suspicion. I'm not sure. There is, like I said earlier, still the stigma. We're a business school, we don't do anything like that. But there is an openness and it's growing. And there is a good group of people, for instance, at the Academy of Management, around spirituality, religion, and management, who all share those values and hold behind it. There are a lot of people in the management education field who see the benefits, who practicing as well. So I think we just need to become stronger.
How can mindfulness be effectively incorporated into contemporary business topics like sustainability, well being, diversity, and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so these are all sort of keywords that, of course, we need to bring into our teaching because they're at the forefront of everything we do. I think the one is that's the most interesting, and I have published and talked in various different ways about that before, is artificial intelligence. I think that is the one that everybody is sort of a little bit sort of, how does this fit? Now, and I'm happy to come and touch on the others, but like I said, the others are explained in the book as well, and I think are a little bit more obvious. But with artificial intelligence, it comes back to thinking about what is the intention of using AI and how does this sit with me? Could be my values, but also, am I getting frustrated with this, right? And when you then start to think about what's the intention of AI, well, AI is just a computer and basically refers to our mental capacity and enhancing our mental capacity. But what AI does not do is it cannot tap into our emotional or our somatic experience, and it will never be able to do that. Um, and I say this now in confidence, and I would think I say this with a lot of confidence. I do not think that you can create a robot that has the same emotional and somatic experience that a human has, because then it would be human. Simple as that, right? Where's the differentiation otherwise? So, and I think we need to bring this in because otherwise, and it also helps us to understand, is there a threat and where is the threat if there is a threat? And that leads me to the second part. With AI, to think about it, how do I experience the use of it? So let's say you have a company and you want to introduce a new AI tool there. What does that mean? Well, that means that maybe I have to cut my workforce. I have to lay them off because I don't need them anymore because I have this great tool now. Um, what does that mean to you? How does this sit with you? Not just on a spreadsheet level, right, in your head, but in your heart. And can you combine that? Can you align with that? Um, so yeah, it comes back to the relationship that we want to have with AI. And there's an article coming out soon that I've written with a colleague about this intentional, mindful relationship that we want to explore and really think about.
Professor Kristen, your book is a most useful resource for business school library. So in part 3 of your book, you provide case studies and resources for immediate use. Could you share an example of how mindfulness-based modules or coaching could be implemented in a business school?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways, and it really depends, A, on the resources, the infrastructure, the expertise within the business school, of course, and the openness to do that as well. I believe that any business curriculum or business management program should have a personal and professional development spine. We see this frequently at MBA level, and we have now integrated it in our undergraduate courses as well at Surrey, and we offer this. And I don't think this should be necessarily an extracurricular activity. This should be integrated because in the end of the day, our working life is not just being in the company and running it on a functional level, but we are there as a person, not as an AI. So, and I think this is what we sort of need to recognize a little bit here. So having a personal professional development stream or spine or a group of modules that lead through all the different years is a really nice way to bring that in. And then you can have, a weekly short 5-minute meditation in the beginning, or you can call it an awareness centering exercise, because often mindfulness has received or has different connotations for people. So I often refer to it when I work with students as awareness centering or developing self-awareness skills. And then we expand on that because that's often a way in, or we talk about it more as, developing self-care to feel less stressed. And so what you do automatically is you also address the issue that we face with all the referrals to well-being centers, because obviously there are a lot of them. And so you from the very beginning provide your students with the tools and the knowledge, both because it's again very experiential, to help themselves a little bit, yeah, and to figure that out, oh, and you would be surprised how many students after 5-minute meditation come and say, I love this. I'm going to do this now every time. And in the reflections that they've submitted for our personal and professional development module in January just now, the amount of times I've read, I really thought this was a pointless exercise. And now I've integrated it into my day to day and I feel so much calmer. That's what we want to see. That's the change. Yeah. And so that's one way to do that, of course. I wouldn't necessarily just have a module called mindfulness in business or something like that. I think that wouldn't go down too well. I think you need to think about it strategically, how you're going to bring it in there and make it part of it so it has relevance. Yeah, I think that that's really important. And then, of course, extracurricular activities are a good source. And when you have extracurricular activities, there is a difference between them being optional, whereas in modules that are compulsory, they feel forced to engage, even though I always extend it as an invitation. So let's say we have a class of 300 and I'm about to do a lecture, and I might say to them, okay, we will take 5 minutes just to check in with ourselves, just center our awareness. It's an invitation. If you don't want to be part of it, absolutely fine. Go back on your phone. It's your choice. You have a choice. I think that is really important as well to make sure that it's not something that they're forced to do because it shouldn't become and it is not a religion. It's a philosophy that people can live by, for instance, but it's still a choice that people take. And so I think we need to keep that open. And everybody has different ways of doing this as well. So yeah, extracurricular, building it in. And then with the coaching, similar. It can be part of the personal and professional development or you can offer sort of coaching outside where people can come and maybe learn that. So I've worked with our well-being center to do this. I've worked with our MBA courses around that, and I just offer additional, sometimes group coaching, sometimes individual coaching as well. It comes back to resource and infrastructure for sure, and it takes some time. It's a lot more time consuming. So a cohort of 300 might not be possible to support that way, but a smaller cohort or an MBA course for sure.
What long-term impact do you believe mindfulness-driven business education strategies will have on the future of management and leadership?
Um, so I think with any strategy that you build, you're formalizing something. Yeah. So you need to be very clear about where you want to go and what the goal is of that strategy and how you're going to go and communicate that. Because if it's just for you, then you can put it in a bin, pointless. So whenever you do develop a strategy, you need to think about what is its purpose. I think that mindfulness based approaches can underpin the development of strategies. And in this last chapter, I talk about mindfulness based business school strategies. So this means not just for education, but to look when we have to devise a business school strategy to really look at all the different areas and functions. So that's research, education, knowledge transfer, external engagement, but then also the people that are there. And so the question is, how can we build it in like a foundation, right? That we can provide like a little playpen. And so that's how I would think about it. I believe if we bring that in more, and this is sort of the driving force of what we do and how we're going to design our curriculum and how we're going to work and manage and collaborate with people and also deliver our learning and teaching. Um, then I think we do have an opportunity to shift our current society from one end of the spectrum towards a sort of more mindfulness-based spectrum of working and living together.
You mentioned incorporating mindfulness coaching into pastoral care. How can this approach support students emotionally and mentally during their academic journey?
Yeah, I think, pastoral care is a really important part, particularly for business management students. So when you imagine they come to us, they're 18 years old, legally in most countries, at 18, they're adults. So they can do what they want. They can drive cars, they can vote, you name it. They have got all loads of options. But their brains are not fully formed yet because they don't fully form until they're 25 years old. So they still need to have a little safety net around them that helps them navigate this world. And we often see it with students who come to university, particularly, they haven't been away from their home for ever before. This is the first time. So they are on their own. They have to be independent. They have to make decisions for themselves. And that can be really hard. And so sometimes they need a little bit of nurturing around that. And I don't think that we are equipped enough to do that in the current system. So what I mean by that is if we haven't learned how to support people, how to nurture, and I'm not saying we all have to be, psychotherapists or qualified coaches in that sense, but to have a notion and interest in it, how can I use a specifically non-violent communication technique, a more mindfulness-based approach to interact and connect with my students and have this sort of relationship that's based on compassion and value and respect, because that's what I would expect from them as well. And knowing that there is someone there. And I think most people who work in education, whether it's universities or schools, we do that because we feel passionate about helping and developing other people. So otherwise, I would question why you're there. If you just want to be an academic who does research, well, then you are a research academic. You're not an educator in that sense. So I think we need to be mindful of that and just training it, knowing how to rephrase things, how to encourage and use open questions most of the time, so that it gives them room to develop and grow, I think is really important.
How do you see the principles of mindfulness and self-awareness applying to business education on a global scale, especially in different cultural contexts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really interesting in the way that there is a I often talk about the Western view and the Eastern view, right? And so especially when we think about mindfulness, has roots in Buddhism and so on, but there's also a sort of more Native American roots that we can draw upon. I think the world nowadays is a lot more open to it. But as a collection of business schools, we all want the same thing. We all have the same goal to develop future leaders who can lead us and the corporates in in a sort of hopefully ethical and sustainable way, right? But that requires checking in with yourself as well. And so I think self-awareness is the key to get into that quite often. Um, and then the mindfulness sort of builds on it. For me, that's all sort of around it. But I do think that these days, globally, it is accepted. It is a concept that people understand. I've worked globally as well. So, obviously, I have students, international students who come here. They might expect it because we are in the Western world. But I have delivered, classes in China as well and in Sri Lanka and also in Oman. I've worked with students there, and there is an openness to it, probably even more so than we have. Yeah. And I think the more people struggle, the more they want to have that sort of help. And actually, the more they struggle, there's a lot less suspicion because they want to change. And that's, I think, where we can probably start.
Professor, my last question. How has your own practice of mindfulness influenced your approach to teaching and leadership within business education?
Yeah, so my own practice is a huge part of my daily experience that I'm having. And, I would invite anybody always to participate. In terms of how I brought it into my teaching, I like to open my lectures, my workshops, whether they're one-off or they're regular, doesn't really matter, with a short awareness centering exercise. Um, I'm also quite receptive, of course, what the energy in the room is. And sometimes this means that, let's say I give a lecture that lasts for 2 hours, and after 45 minutes, we might have a break and stuff like that. Then we go back in, we have another 20 minutes, and I realize everybody gets a bit fidgety. Of course, the lecture is coming to an end, but it also means that sometimes I give room to that and I invite them to just stop for a moment and move around. Because in the end of the day, it's about moving the energy around. And if you allow that to happen, it's a lot better. Or, for instance, in seminars, if I have a lot of first year students, they find a lot of things funny. And I speak to that. So if I do, let's say, a short meditation and they start to laugh about it, I speak to that. I don't take anything personal. So I say, well, and if you notice that you just need to laugh, or the emotion of feeling joy is arising, or embarrassment, whatever that might be, just notice that what that is and how it feels like, and when the body do you feel that, and allow it to be there. And as soon as I do that, they stop because it's not, it has no value anymore, right? Because I've already spoken to it. And that is a really nice way to sometimes diffuse situations, yeah. Or if they laugh and then it sort of goes like a fire and then a lot of them laugh, let them laugh for 5 minutes. Just let it out, you know. Don't tell them off or say, you need to be quiet now, blah blah, go outside the room. It's not about that. And I think if we teach mindfulness, we need to live and breathe mindfulness. And that means to create the space for us and everybody else to, have an experience and be tuned in and allow it to be there in the present moment and not to shut it down because it might not be appropriate. So I think that's where I am with this. And so this is why I encourage the regular practice if you do want to teach it yourself, because you learn to be okay with it and you don't take it personal because you start to understand the mechanisms and the ways of being in a different way as well.
Thank you for joining us today, Professor Christine Rivers. It's been a true pleasure to have you on the podcast. Your insights into the intersection of mindfulness and business education are truly valuable, and your contributions to shaping future leaders are inspiring. We look forward to seeing the continued impact of your work in the field of business education. Once again, thank you, Professor Rivers, for your time and wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.